Now, 100 years after the end of World War II in 2045, it is highly likely that the number one power in the region will not be Washington, D.C., but will be Beijing.
Did you hear that? According to former Singapore diplomat and geopolitical strategist Kishore Mahbubani, China has a high chance of overtaking the United States and becoming the dominant power in the Pacific and possibly even the world by 2045. Now, that is a huge statement. Some people will strongly disagree. They believe America's military strength, innovation, alliances, and global influence will allow it to remain the world's leading power for decades to come. Others believe the economic numbers already show that the balance of power is shifting. But regardless of which side you agree with, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The world is changing and the old balance of power is shifting. For decades, the US enjoyed a unique position. It shaped the global institutions, influenced international trade, and became the world's dominant superpower after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But history never stands still. And this is exactly the point Professor Mahbubani makes in this clip. Let's listen to what he had to say.
And by the way, I can state something very, very obvious. There has been no doubt that United States has been the number one power in the Pacific, certainly since the end of World War II. No question. Now, 100 years after the end of World War II in 2045, it is highly likely that the number one power in the region will not be Washington, D.C., but will be Beijing. And if you don't understand how Beijing thinks, how it operates, and how it sees the world, and you don't have the same comfortable network of people down there, you don't reflexively understanding what's going on down there, you are blinding yourself to new realities. And I know, and I'll be very blunt with you, okay? Australians love to be loved by the United States, which is good. Go ahead. Get loved by the United States. I would like to get loved by the United States. You should be. But that shouldn't close your eyes to the fact that you got to understand the other powers equally well too. And frankly, I mean, if you go to, let's say, Australian schools, for example, how many children are learning Bahasa Indonesia? I thought the number would be going up, but I'm told the number is going down. And I find that quite shocking. And incidentally, when I speak about the Asian century, I also emphasize that Asia has got not one civilization like Western civilization, but many civilizations. So we're entering a multi-civilizational world. Australians can tell you how many presidents United States has had and what secretaries of state has had, but they can't give you the basic information about Chinese civilization, how it began, where it came from, how it evolved, how it suffered a century of humiliation. All these facts should be known to an Australian. They're not known. They're also equally ignorant about Islamic civilization, how it succeeded, how it thrived, how it came to Southeast Asia, and what are the different trends and currents in the Islamic world that you got to be aware of. And similarly, by the way, even though India is, of course, clearly in many ways a country that the West feels comfortable with, you can see that Prime Minister Modi no longer wears jackets and ties when he goes out and represents India. That's a very powerful signal that he's going back to traditional Indian civilization. So I think the ignorance that the average Australian has about other Asian civilizations is going to be a handicap. And again, speaking of friend, I mean, I say if your geography is Canada, it's okay, don't worry, you're comfortable. But your geography is not Canada. And remember, the most important thing that anyone who thinks about geopolitics must realize that geopolitics is a combination of two words: geography and politics. And geography is destiny. And Australia's geography is its destiny. And Australia's geography means that Australia is going to have an Asian destiny and not a Western destiny.
Did you catch what Professor Mahbubani was really saying? On the surface, it sounds like he's talking about just Australia, but I think his point is much bigger than that. Australia is simply an example of a challenge facing much of the Western world today. For decades, many Western countries became used to being at the center of global politics, economics, and security. So when Asia began rising again, many continued looking at the region through the same old lens. They assumed that as China became richer, it would naturally become more like the West. But that never happened. China became wealthier, more technologically advanced, and one of the world's largest economies. Yet, it remained uniquely Chinese. And according to Mahbubani, this is where many Western countries continue to struggle. They often debate China's actions without first understanding how China sees itself. Mahbubani even mentioned something that many people outside Asia rarely learn in school: the century of humiliation. Because for China, this isn't just about history, it is part of the country's national memory, shaping how Chinese leaders think about sovereignty, foreign intervention, and national security. You don't have to agree with China's policy to recognize one simple fact. If you don't understand how another country thinks, it becomes much harder to understand why it behaves the way it does. And this is where Mahbubani's famous line comes in: geography is destiny. Australia cannot change the fact that it is part of the Asia Pacific. Its future will inevitably be shaped not only by the United States, but also by China, ASEAN, India, Japan, South Korea, and the rest of Asia. But honestly, this idea doesn't apply only to Australia. It applies to much of the Western world. Because whether people like it or not, Asia is once again becoming one of the world's main centers of power. Now, before anyone misunderstands, this isn't about saying one side is better than the other. It's about understanding history. Many people today look at history as if the West has always been the dominant force on Earth. But if you zoom out, that's simply not true. For most of recorded history, China and India were among the world's largest economies. The period when Europe and later the United States dominated the global system was actually a relatively short chapter, lasting roughly 200 years after the Industrial Revolution. Today, we are witnessing another major shift, not necessarily the birth of a completely new world order, but the return of a more multipolar world. And the numbers help explain why. Back in 1980, China accounted for just 2% of global GDP measured by purchasing power parity, while the US accounted for more than 20%. Today, those numbers look very different. China now represents nearly one-fifth of the global economy by purchasing power, after achieving one of the fastest economic transformations in modern history. Hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of poverty. Its industries moved from low-cost manufacturing into high technology, electric vehicles, renewable energy, and advanced infrastructure. So the question isn't simply why China has become stronger. The bigger question is why so many countries are choosing to strengthen their ties with China. Part of the answers lies in the different approaches China and the West have taken toward the developing world. For decades, Western countries often link investment and financial assistance with expectations for political and economic reforms. China, on the other hand, largely took a different approach. It focused on infrastructure, trade, and economic development. Roads, ports, railways, power plants, industrial parks. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, China expanded its economic partnerships across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Of course, China's approach has also attracted criticism. Some countries have raised concerns about debt, transparency, and dependence on Beijing. Those debates are real. However, so is another reality. Many developing countries see Chinese investment as an opportunity to build infrastructure, create jobs, and grow their economies. Take Southeast Asia as an example. ASEAN sits between China and the US. Yet, China has become the region's largest trading partner, with annual trade now exceeding over $900 billion. For many governments, this isn't about choosing sides, it's about economic opportunity. Another important difference is how each side thinks about the future. Western democracies have many strengths, including innovation, strong institutions, and world-class universities. But politics often revolves around election cycles. Governments change, policies change, long-term strategies can become difficult to maintain. China, on the other hand, operates differently. Whether people agree with Beijing's system or not, it generally plans much further ahead. Its leaders often think in decades rather than election cycles. That doesn't automatically make one system better than the other, of course. But it does mean understanding how China thinks has become increasingly important. Because if the 21st century is becoming more centered on Asia, then understanding Asia is no longer optional. It is essential. Now, does this mean the West is finished? No, not at all. The United States and its allies remain global leaders in innovation, finance, higher education, and scientific research. China also faces major challenges, from demographics to slowing economic growth. The future is far from certain. But one thing has clearly changed. The era when one group of countries could shape the global agenda on its own is fading. The real challenge for the West isn't simply how to compete with China. It's how to understand a world where power is becoming more widely shared. A world where Asia is no longer just part of the global story. It is once again becoming one of its main chapters. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Do you think Western countries have done enough to understand China's rise? Or are they still viewing Asia through an outdated lens? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more discussions about the biggest geopolitical changes shaping our world. Thank you for watching.